Properties. Where we said before that inner city is going to give you more of a guaranteed capital growth, is that for all properties, or are there certain types of properties that, especially in the bank size, they're slightly more shady about lending 95% on?
Yeah, good point, Chris. A really good point on that one. The banks are really looking for properties, just like you've seen on the screen there. They love those properties. They'll lend at 95%. They'll be very comfortable with that for the right applicant. But then you go into what I call the splinter investments such as student accommodation and retirement style accommodation and hotel rooms. People have really done their money on those sorts of properties, and the risk on those sorts of properties, regardless where they're located, can really be quite serious. And when you go inside a radius of about 3 or 4 kilometres in Melbourne anyway, it changes to quite high risk. It's very high density living. There's a lot of high rises in there, and it becomes inverted. Buying, in my view, in the CBD and the fringe areas is almost like buying out in the outer suburbs for risk factor, and also for getting capital growth can be worse than some of the outer areas.
Yeah, and look, I've certainly even been part of some of the shows on kind of mainstream channels where they have the sensationalising news is, right, this is the latest place to make your money. And certainly quite a lot of them have done it on student accommodation because the rent returns are actually pretty good on that. But wherever you've got that additional profit, is there always typically risk that comes with that as well? That you're getting the revenue, but you're not necessarily getting the growth?
Well, what's interesting about that, the capital growth is often not there with student accommodation. The problem is, like a lot of these splinter investments, is because when you go to buy that property, there's a huge marketing machine that's in there to help find the buyers. When anyone's got to go out and find a buyer, to actually ring people at home and find a buyer and look for them, that means there's no competition. And then when you as the investor have to go out there and try to sell it, you're competing against these same marketing operations who have got tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands of dollars in marketing. It's tough to sell, and there's always a new one going up. They're not irreplaceable. There's no scarcity value, and that's where your capital growth starts to go down the tubes. I got a client who bought on the Sunshine Coast. He bought there 8 years ago. He's going to lose $100,000 against the purchase price 8 years later, and he's been losing $10,000 a year. Now he's retired, no depreciation benefits. Yeah, what a loss that is. That's a huge risk, and that's typical.
And so this is kind of speculative property investing rather than, because they always say, look, property doubles every 7 to 10 years, but that's looking at average homes that mum and dad lives in that are nice and stable and I guess average for everything.
The golden rule is you've got to be able to sell to a mum and dad who can move in and will have the wow factor that Cameron was talking about. They've got to fall in love with it, they've got to be able to live in it and live in it straight away. And that's where top dollar comes from. That's why these properties that Cameron just talked about are so good, because it really appeals to mum and dad, and they'll pay a premium to get into it. A student accommodation, hotel rooms, service apartments, mum and dad can never live in those, and so
it's the emotional value, I think, is what you're trying to say.
Absolutely, the emotional value,
which you can't actually put a price on.
And once it's got some age on it as well, going back to the 80s and earlier, it starts to become less replaceable, and so it becomes more valuable.